Well, God's grace, His mercy, and peace are yours in Jesus Christ our Savior. And there's a sermon outline if you want to track along with this. We introduced the theme, Behold, I make all things new, last week. And so this one has that new idea in it. His mercies are new every morning. So that's why we have this we're going back to the Old Testament in Lamentations. So we're going to explore that a little bit. It's interesting when you look at some of the history of hymns. So Great is Thy Faithfulness is one of the great kind of, and when we say modern, it's from the 20th century as opposed to the 15th or 16th century, like A Mighty Fortress or whatever. Oh, I need that paper right there. I'll grab it. So it's interesting when you do some history of certain hymns, like the author of Amazing Grace, who was a slave owner, or the author of It Is Well With My Soul. That is a very powerful story, because the author of that hymn had just lost his whole family, his wife and children, in a shipwreck. And he immediately sat down and penned that. I mean, I'd like to consider myself a man of faith. That's something, isn't it? In the face of that tremendous loss, to be able to write those words, of those soaring words. Or others, Charles Wesley has a hymn that I'm not really familiar with, And Can It Be? And it was after his own personal coming to faith. Very dramatic experience that he had. So some of those hymns have that story behind it. It's interesting, this author of this hymn and its composer, his name was Tom Chisholm. So Tom Chisholm is the author of this Great is Thy Faithfulness, and William Runyon is the composer of the lyrics. It was published in 1923. And a fairly, just a regular guy. He had been a school teacher. He ended up being ordained as a minister, but his personal health was not good. And so he ended up getting a desk job selling insurance in the 1920s and 30s and so forth. But he was a prolific poet. And so he wrote. Like that passage you heard from 2 Timothy, that probably was an early poem sung by the church. We have some examples of that in the New Testament and in the Old Testament. Probably sung. But this was a poet, Tom Chisholm. And so he wrote this and couldn't find a hymn music for it, but William Runyon caught it and he composed to it. And it really was not popular for quite a while until at Moody Bible College, George Beverly Shea, who was on the radio and led singing of hymns from Moody Bible in Chicago, found this one and loved it. And so Moody Bible Institute made it kind of their anthem. It was their anthem, Great is Thy Faithfulness. And even then, though, it didn't catch on in America. It was Moody's thing, just that college. And then, but it became like the most popular hymn in England. It became the most popular hymn in England. But what made it popular in the United States was a young student at Moody came along, and he decided to use it in his own ministry, and his name was Billy Graham. And Billy Graham in the 50s in his crusades used this hymn faithfully, sorry, no pun intended, but used it regularly in his crusades. So that's how it became part of our language, is Great is Thy Faithfulness. So it isn't some great soaring story of trauma in the author's life, but you should know that the text of this does come in the face of almost, for us, inconceivable tragedy and horror. Here's the circumstance of those words from Lamentations chapter 3. And this is always fun. I always love to do a little bit of Bible study. So if you jot notes or anything, or if you ever keep any of the sermon outlines, I always encourage that a little bit. Just helps you remember. But Jeremiah, obviously the author of the book of Jeremiah, and in the book of Jeremiah, he is predicting the fall of Jerusalem. It's the prophecy about the fall of Jerusalem. Hey, people, you've strayed from God. You've turned your back on God. Return to the Lord, or this is going to happen. This is what's going to happen. And all of it came true. And Jeremiah himself, his own fate, he was cast into a cistern. He was hauled off. Some legends go that he was blinded and things like that because he spoke the truth to the kings. The king had other prophets that told him exactly what he wanted to hear. And Jeremiah was the one voice that said, nope, this is the Lord's way. And he paid the price for it. But then Lamentations is a briefer book, and it is the lament after the fall. So after the fall of Jerusalem, so imagining, right? I mean, you can put this in all kinds of contexts. Think about the fall of Western Europe before Nazi Germany. Think about the fall of Eastern Europe before the Cold War and communism. Think about the fall of Japan before the bombing of Hiroshima or Nagasaki, right? Just to picture those, or even if you want to go to Afghanistan in the very current news and say there was a prophecy that this would happen, ignored, happened, and now this is the lament, right? So these are the words of a lament. If you have your Bible, you can see in chapter 3, the first 20 verses are hard to read. It's like, yep, we deserve this, and our teeth are ground to dust, and it's like I'm chewing gravel. And because picture it, you can see the horror. We see it in the news if you're watching the news at all. I mean, women throwing their babies over the fence, for people to take, people falling out of airplanes in desperation trying to leave a country, people dying, there's blood, there's horror, there's loss. And I'm giving you the historical context. I'm not making no political statements here, please. You know me, I think, well enough, I hope. My point is, it doesn't begin to compare of the heartache that Jeremiah feels and the people of Israel. This is the loss of everything. This is the loss of everything. This is now about 586 BC. That's 1,000 years they've been in the promised land. It's 1,000 years, and it is gone. Temple destroyed. All the people are hauled off. The northern kingdom was already destroyed. 10 tribes gone. The temple now is gone. The capital is gone. Jerusalem is laid waste. You just imagine smoke rising from the rubble and bodies strewn everywhere. And Jeremiah is left to lament. That's the scene. So why do this is very encouraging, Pastor Dinger. Thank you very much. One of the things we know out of the last 18 months is, and I'm going to keep saying it because I don't hear it talked about enough. We talk about positive cases and hospitalizations and death, and we don't talk enough about depression, isolation, anxiety, lack of education, people not in community together. We have not. That's going to be a hard cost account. That one's a hard cost account. But any of you who work in these fields, teachers, healthcare workers, what is the cost of a person unable to be with their loved one? What's that cost? What's the cost of a child who needs hot lunch and can't be in school? What's the cost to a family who cannot manage all their kids together at once? What's the cost? And boy, in the church, we better be in the front line. And in many ways, I'm thankful that we are here in Pocatello, in school and church. But Jeremiah's heart is destroyed. That's the lament. And really, here's the point of the message. How can you say, great is thy faithfulness in the face of that? There are families that are grieving the events of the last few days. How can they say, God, great is your faithfulness? Because Jeremiah does it. So I'm asking each of you, some of you, this may be fresh and raw, because some of you may have lost a loved one or experienced something or are experiencing something now in which you are struggling to say, God, great is your faithfulness. That may be true and honest. Or maybe there's a point in your history where you can remember that, and maybe you haven't quite gotten to that point again, where you can say, okay, God, great is your faithfulness. Or maybe if you're wise enough, that someday the day's going to come and you're saying, Lord, please give me the faith and the strength to be able to say it then. So this is for us all. I hope it's for all of us. So if you're following along, here's the point. I want to unpack this a little bit because Jeremiah says things like this. He pierced my heart with arrows. I became the laughingstock of all my people. They mocked me all day long. He's filled me with bitter herbs, sated me with gall. He broken my teeth with gravel, trampled me in the dust. I've forgotten what prosperity is. And that's the lament. And then in verse 21, yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. So point number one is this. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. Isn't that an interesting word that the prophet uses there? We're not consumed. I would have probably chosen a different word. I'm just thinking. I would have said we're not destroyed or we are not brokenhearted, or we are not devastated. But he says a different word. We are not eaten up. There's an old story attributed in World War II to Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He's a Lutheran minister who stood up against the Nazis. Many Lutheran ministers and other Christians acquiesced. Out of fear and anxiety, just acquiesced to the government. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer didn't take what the government said at face value and stood up and paid for it with his life. Because he was offered sanctuary in America, and it's attributed to him, this statement. He said, there was a time in Nazi Germany, National Socialism, he said, when they came for the gypsies, because the Nazis said the gypsies were vermin, and nobody said anything. And then they came for the homosexuals, and nobody said anything. And then they came for the Jews, and nobody said anything. And so when they came for me, there was no one left to say anything. And the reason that happens is because there's an attitude, and it's pervasive, I'm afraid, too often, even in our own culture. It's a not in my backyard, or a, what's the other one I think? I've got mine mentality. You know what I'm talking about? I've got mine, don't bug me. Or not in my backyard, don't bug me. When they came for everyone else and they finally came for me, there was no one left to protest. That's a consumer mentality, and God forbid that it should spread in our church. A consumer mentality is marked by, what have you done for me lately? Or how good was the band? Or did the preacher keep me from falling asleep? Because, if I fell asleep in that one, I got to find me another church. Do you get what I'm saying? Oh, there wasn't nursery care for my kids. Or whatever it is. I'm not trying to be a jerk, you guys. I'm being honest. Is that sometimes we fall victim to a consumer mentality. What is it? What's in it for me? What have you done for me lately, kind of thing. And that, my friends, is not the church. The church is a family of God. We gather together as family. And so here's what he says. Catch it in here. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed. Because here's the thing. Once they came for everyone else, right? Once they consumed everyone else, they finally came for me. I don't know if any of you are familiar with C.S. Lewis's Screwtape Letters. I know you're familiar with the title, but if you've read it, Screwtape Letters. You know what the demon's goal is in Screwtape Letters? That's a book about how demons want to tempt you to fall away from your faith or Christ. The demons, and they're talking to each other. And you know what their goal is? To consume us. That's the image, that they consume us. That's a horrifying image, isn't it? I will guarantee you this. There are people who stand in the middle of war zones with blood and horror and children and death around them, and all they can think of is, we are consumed. We are no more. And the devil is longing to put that into our hearts, and that is not what God does. We are not consumed. Instead, he feeds us. God's role is to feed us. He doesn't feed on us. He feeds us. The devil would love to consume us. He would love us to eat ourselves alive. And I find that to be the case. You know what I find most devastating about all the big arguments in our culture right now? Is because the nastier people get, eventually you're going to eat each other alive. That's what that is. You eat each other alive. And I will not have it. So please, careful on social media, people. Careful. I will just tell you this publicly here right now. It is the worst place in the world, listen to me carefully, to conduct a reasonable, thoughtful argument. There is no thoughtful argument on social media, so knock it off. I am telling you, on any side. Bumper sticker living is not living. It consumes us. And it consumes those you point it towards and throw arrows at. I'm not kidding. Okay, so this is me. I'm being your pastor here now, okay? But here's the point. Contrast that with God's way. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed. What are we fed with by God? His love, his compassions. God feeds us with love and compassion. You want proof? You're going to come kneel here at this table and receive exactly that. By his love and compassion, his body, his blood, he will feed you, not consume you. Feed you. That's the truest of all foods. That's the food that keeps Jeremiah going. In the face of that hurt and that loss, it keeps him going. You know, we just talked today. I'm just giving you this little word too. We talked in between services a little bit, leadership in church, because I said, what do we do? We got this Delta variant. I want to be cautious. I want to be kind. And so what we're probably going to do, not today, but next week, we don't mandate things around here, by the way. We just don't. We don't mandate things. You guys all make choices. You're grown-ups, and we count on you being kind. And you have been. I am so proud of this congregation because there is a wide variety of opinion. Treat each other with patience and kindness. That's what we do. But we'll probably put on masks to serve communion and ask our ushers to do the same next week. We'll probably do that as we enter into flu season. We think that's a small sacrifice to make. We don't think there's any magic wand. Oh, we did that and we saved everybody. No, we're not idiots. But we think we're going to do those things and continue to do them as a family to care for one another. Because I don't want to go backwards, people, right? You get what I'm saying? I don't want to go backwards. I don't want to go into fear and anxiety and finger pointing. We're not doing that. We're going to lift each other up because the truest of all foods is the love and compassion of Christ, which we get to reflect to others. Second thing. So I am a fan of really bad baseball teams. My baseball teams stink. They just do. Like the Seattle Mariners they're the worst. They haven't been to the playoffs longer than anybody. I mean, even the playoffs. They can't even make a wild card. They're terrible. And the Mets, they're just doormats. One of the most famous statements ever made about the Mets was this: can't anybody play baseball around here? It was that. So they're terrible. And so, but you know what's great about baseball fans like me, long-suffering baseball fans? Spring training. Spring training is the best. Because I would go down every year, visit my dad, because the Mariners had spring training in Phoenix. I'd go down every year, and they were terrible. They were just so bad. Those were the years when they just were so terrible. But baby, I'm telling you, you're out there in spring training. It's March, early March, and the sun is out, and it is like, we can do it. So you're saying there's a chance, right? That's what you got going. And so, so fans like us, it's all we got to cling to. Because about 4 weeks into the season, we're 10 games behind everybody, and it's all done. Anyway, but hope springs eternal in spring training. It's a fresh year. It's a new start. And you know what I love about this passage? Here's the second thing that Jeremiah does. Why he can say, I have hope in the face of this horror that he is facing. Not only because I am being fed by the love and compassion of God, but also because his mercies are new every morning. God has built into creation fresh starts. God has built it into creation. God could have set up our world. The Almighty God, the omnipotent God, could have set up our world in which, as the earth goes around, we all live in the sun. We're in the sun 24 hours a day. Could be. Physics and biology people, don't email me. I'm saying God could do it. God could do it. But he chose not to do that. He chose to have a cycle of the heavenly bodies in such a way that seasons change and day and light we move back and forth between day and light. And I believe there's a purpose there, both in springtime and in daylight, in dawn. Your mercies are new every morning. And who are those mercies for? Everybody. Everybody. God could have done that too. He could have said, all the people who believe in me, you get sunshine all the time. You get sunshine. You people who don't believe in me, no sunshine. Didn't do that. The sun and the rain, the sun shines and the rain falls on the godly and the ungodly alike. Praise God. God is revealing to the whole world, whether they accept him or not, that his mercies are new every morning. He refreshes all the time. It's built into creation. Thanks be to God. Here's a reason why. I love the past. I love remembering about memories. We remember trips to Disneyland and birthdays and my parents and my mom, and we talk about childhood trips. I love all that. It's probably heavily embellished, right? It's probably deeply inaccurate, but we love that past. And I'm a student of history. I love to study history. I love to learn about it. I love to understand it. I love to see how it is. Here's the thing. The past is great, but you can't live there. We're in error when we live in the past. And here's another thing that allows Jeremiah to be able to stand and say, great is your faithfulness, is because he's not living in the past. He's living in the idea that every morning God renews his grace. God shows his mercies new every morning. Because you see, he's got your past. If you're wrestling with shame or background or history, God's got it. Knows it full well, already forgiven it. It's in the past. And he's already standing in your future that we worry about and has it firmly in hand. God is longing for us to live with him in the present, with his presence. Living in the present with the presence of God. And so that's why fresh starts are built into God's created order. The third thing to allow the prophet to be able to say, great is your faithfulness. So have you been to the museums in Cody, Wyoming? Oh man, I spend 2 days there. So when we go to Cody, we always plan a night overnight. And I like to get to Cody by late morning or early afternoon so I can spend a whole afternoon and evening and then the whole next day. I'm a geek, sorry. But I'm the guy, my kids hate it when I go to museums because I read every word on every plaque, okay? There are times I even take notes. I love it. And so, you know what's interesting? So I'm there in Cody, and I'm reading this book. I bought a book in the bookstore on Plains Indians and how they captured bison and how they did hunts, different things. And one of the big ones is off a cliff, But then they would conduct other kinds of hunts, a whole variety of those kinds of things. And they had a certain culture in that. And what's so interesting about it is certain tribes, when they would take down a bison, when they would work as a team and be able to take down a bison, which would, 2 or 3 or 1 even, and they would feed the whole, grouping for a while. And they would use every part of the animal. It's amazing. But when they made the kill, they could start butchering some of the smaller animals, but the lead animal, that one was reserved for the warrior who led the charge and the chief. And there were portions of that bison that no one else could have. Certain, heart and things like that, certain things that were just considered so hugely significant for the success of the kill and the life of the tribe and so forth. It's a really interesting story, but those portions were reserved. And people had to wait. They had to wait for themselves to partake before the leaders could come and get those choicest portions. This is an interesting phrase here, isn't it? Look at what Jeremiah says. He says to myself, the Lord is my portion, therefore I will wait for him. Here's the point. The Lord is the choicest of all portions. And so, I'm seeing images on the news, and you see this in hurricanes and drought and relief efforts, but we've seen it in the news in the Middle East recently, whereas people are distributing food, people are frantic. They're just frantic. They're grasping at anything. They're grasping, longing for something, some morsel of food, some piece of clothing, some bottle of water, anything. They're just so frantic for those things. And I look at that and my heart just breaks because we live in such abundance. We live in such abundance. And when I look at that, I say, why are they so frantic? And the reason is they don't think there'll be enough. Right? Am I right? There will not be enough. And this is what the prophet is saying. In the face of all that devastation he's facing, because I guarantee you this, what Jeremiah is standing in at that moment makes what's happening in the world today pale in comparison. And he is saying, I will wait for the best. Boy, we aren't good at that, are we? Patience, waiting. That's why I love our seasons of Advent and Lent. They're waiting seasons. And so they make us do that. But I will wait for the best of all portions, because when I have that portion, it will always be enough. And we know more than enough. But it will always be enough. I will never be lacking. That's why the prophet can say this. It's the Lord is my portion. I don't rush for just any portion, because his portion is best. God's timing is best, and we receive it by faith. Last point on this one. And this one I'm going to drift away from the Jeremiah passage just a little bit, because the passage in Timothy, this is a really poignant passage. It's hard for me to read it and not get emotional. Paul considers Timothy his spiritual child, his father in the faith, right? Timothy is a young pastor. He's provided Timothy tremendous counsel and guidance. And Paul is about to lose his life. He knows that it could be that day, it could be the next day, but his life is ending. And so he's giving Timothy some counsel, and he quotes this little hymn, which I just love, because here's the last, and I think most significant reason that we can confess with the prophet, great is thy faithfulness. Regardless of what loss, what hurt we may be facing today, we may be still grappling with in our past, or others and friends that we know that are still grappling, we can still say it. Here's why he can say it. This is not a transaction which God is doing with us. We're not paying for his mercy. We're not being good and getting a reward. The fourth point is this: some things never change. And this is good news. Some things never change. Now, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the theme is your mercies are new every morning, isn't it? But thank God, some things never change. Here's the point. In that hymn, it concludes this way: if we are faithless, he is faithful. Do you get the tagline? It's very powerful. For he cannot disown himself. What does God think of you? Oh, wow. He cannot disown himself. You are his. Flesh of my flesh, bone of my bone. I mean, God is not a flesh and blood human being. Don't get me wrong. But you get what I'm saying? God is, we are, and we're not like, we are him. We are part of him. He considers us part of himself. I love this, that in the human creation, in biology, God is made. You know this, parents. When will you ever stop loving your kid? You can't. You just can't. There are times when I want to. Not really. Sort of. Maybe. Anyway, you can't. You cannot stop loving your kid. Even in the worst and most horrible things they may say or they may do, it is built into us. Why? Because that kid is me. Comes out of me and my wife's body. It has come out of a body. And that is me. And so are we as the children of God. God cannot ever, he cannot stop loving you. And that gives Jeremiah hope. That's how great is the faithfulness of God.